It was a Tuesday. Or maybe a Wednesday. The days started blurring together once the treatments began, each one a fresh assault on my already weakened body. But I remember the exact moment I realized my son, David, wasn't coming back. It wasn't a dramatic argument, no shouted words or slamming doors. It was the silence. The chilling, absolute silence that followed my calls, my texts, my desperate pleas for help. The moment I understood, with a clarity that felt like a physical blow, that the son I had poured my entire life into, the boy I had raised with every fiber of my being, had simply vanished. Just when I needed him most. You see, I'd always imagined David as my rock, my steadfast companion in old age. We had a bond, or so I believed, forged in laughter, shared dreams, and the quiet understanding that only a mother and son can truly have. He was my only child, a bright, ambitious young man who, even in his adult life, would still call me mommy sometimes, a nostalgic slip that would melt my heart. We had our disagreements, of course, what family doesn't? But the foundation, the love, felt unbreakable. Until it wasn't. My name is Eleanor Vance, and I'm 62 years old. Or I was 62 when this nightmare began. Now, I feel 100. My life wasn't extraordinary, not in the way you see in movies. I was a school teacher for 35 years, shaping young minds, finding joy in the small victories of a child finally understanding a complex equation or writing their first coherent paragraph. My husband, Thomas, was an engineer, a kind and steady man who loved me fiercely. We built a good life together, a modest but comfortable home filled with books, music, and the scent of my baking. Our greatest creation, though, was David. David was a beautiful baby, all chubby cheeks and curious eyes. As he grew, he was always bright, a little too clever for his own good sometimes, but always with a spark. Thomas and I made sacrifices for him, not in a resentful way, but out of pure love. We saved every penny to send him to the best schools, encouraged his passions, celebrated his achievements, big and small. When Thomas passed away 10 years ago, suddenly, and without warning from a heart attack, it was David and I against the world. He was 25 then, already establishing himself in the world of finance, sharp suits, and even sharper wit. He was my comfort, my reason to keep going. We grieved together, leaning on each other. Or so I thought. Looking back, the cracks were probably there, subtle fissures I chose to ignore, or perhaps, was too blinded by love to see. After his father died, David became more focused on his career, less on family. He moved to another city, a bustling metropolis where opportunities, he said, were endless. I understood. I encouraged him. Go chase your dreams, son, I told him, even as a tiny ache settled in my chest. He'd visit for holidays, call me every Sunday, a ritual we maintained religiously. He even offered to help with some of my finances, setting up investments, advising me on my pension. I trusted him implicitly. He was my son. My health had always been robust. A few colds here and there, the usual aches and pains of aging, but nothing serious. So, when the fatigue started, a bone-deep weariness that no amount of sleep could cure, I brushed it off. Just getting old, Eleanor, I'd tell myself. Then came the persistent cough, the weight loss, the unsettling aches. My doctor, bless her thoroughness, ordered a battery of tests. I remember the day she called. Her voice was gentle, but the words hit me like a physical blow. Eleanor, we need to talk. We found a mass. Cancer. Stage 4 lung cancer. The world tilted. It wasn't just the diagnosis, it was the prognosis. Aggressive. Advanced. The treatments would be brutal, invasive, and there were no guarantees. I called David immediately. He was at work, in a meeting, he said, but he'd call me back. I waited by the phone, my heart pounding a desperate rhythm against my ribs. When he finally called, his voice was clipped, professional. Mom, what's up? Everything okay? David, I started, my voice trembling. I got some news. It's not good. I told him everything, the clinical details, the fear, the uncertainty. I waited for his gasp, his rush of concern, his promise to be there. Instead, there was a pause, a beat of silence that stretched into an eternity. "Wow, Mom. That's really tough," he finally said, his tone oddly detached. "What are the doctors saying?" I explained the treatment plan, the chemotherapy, the radiation, the surgeries they hope to perform. "I'm going to need help, David," I confessed, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "I won't be able to manage everything on my own. The house, appointments, just company." Another pause. "Right. Yeah. Look, Mom, I'm really swamped at work right now. Big project. But I'll see what I can do. I'll come down as soon as I can, okay? Just gotta figure things out here." "Okay," I said, a tiny sliver of hope flickering. "Just let me know." He didn't come. Not that week. Not the next. The phone calls became shorter, less frequent. My Sunday calls went to voicemail more often than not. His excuses were always plausible: a demanding boss, an important client, a last-minute business trip. Each excuse chipped away at my hope, leaving behind a raw, aching wound. My first chemotherapy session was brutal. I was sick, nauseous, utterly exhausted. I had to take a taxi to the hospital and back, stumbling through the door, collapsing onto my couch, too weak to even make myself a cup of tea. I tried to call David. 3 times. No answer. I left a tearful voicemail, a plea for him to just call me back, to tell me he loved me. Nothing. That's when the real betrayal began to sink in. It wasn't just his absence, it was the financial aspect. Remember those investments he set up for me? The ones he was managing? When the medical bills started piling up, I needed to access some of my savings, a nest egg Thomas and I had carefully built for our retirement. I called David. "David, I need to get some money transferred for my treatments," I explained, trying to keep my voice steady. "Can you help me with the accounts?" "Oh, Mom," he sighed, a sound that grated on my raw nerves. "Those are tied up right now. You know, investments. You can't just pull them out willy-nilly. It'll mess with the returns." "But I need them now," I insisted, a tremor entering my voice. "The hospital needs payment. I'm falling behind." "Look, I'll see what I can do," he said, his voice flat. "But it might take a while. Is there any other money you can use in the meantime?" "Other money?" He knew my financial situation intimately. My pension was barely enough to cover my basic living expenses. My savings, the ones he was managing, were all I had. A cold dread began to creep into my heart. Days turned into weeks. Weeks into months. My health deteriorated. My hair fell out in clumps, a constant, stark reminder of my battle. I was gaunt, weak, a shadow of my former self. And David remained absent. His calls stopped altogether. My texts went unanswered. It was as if I had ceased to exist. I remember one particularly low night. I was curled up in bed, shivering despite the blankets, the pain gnawing at my bones. I stared at the ceiling, tears silently tracking paths down my temples into my pillow. "Why, David? Why?" I whispered into the darkness. "How could you abandon me like this?" The realization wasn't a sudden explosion but a slow, creeping horror. He wasn't busy. He wasn't swamped. He was deliberately ignoring me. He had chosen his comfortable, unburdened life over his dying mother. And the money, the way he'd talked about the money. A terrible suspicion began to form. That night was my turning point. Lying there, feeling utterly alone and utterly worthless, something snapped. The grief and self-pity that had consumed me began to transform into a simmering anger. Not just anger at David, but anger at myself for allowing this to happen. For trusting so blindly. For becoming so utterly dependent. I looked around my quiet house, the house Thomas and I had built, the house where David had grown up. It was still filled with memories, but now they felt tainted. I wasn't just fighting cancer, I was fighting for my dignity, for my legacy. I wasn't going to let David, or this disease, defeat me. I was Eleanor Vance, a fighter. I always had been. The next morning, I made a decision. It was terrifying, but necessary. I called Sarah, a dear friend and colleague from my teaching days. She was a no-nonsense woman, practical and fiercely loyal. "Sarah," I croaked into the phone, my voice raspy. "I need your help." I told her everything, the cancer, David's abandonment, the chilling suspicion about my finances. Sarah listened patiently, her silence punctuated only by the occasional sharp intake of breath. When I finished, she didn't offer platitudes. "Eleanor," she said, her voice firm, "we're going to fix this. Every single bit of it. You focus on getting better. I'll help with the rest." And she did. Sarah became my lifeline. She drove me to appointments, cooked me meals, and, most importantly, helped me navigate the murky waters of my financial situation. It was daunting. My investments, the ones David had supposedly managed, were indeed tied up. But not in the way he'd implied. It took a forensic accountant, recommended by Sarah's cousin, to unravel the mess. What they found was a sickening tapestry of deceit. David hadn't just invested my money, he had systematically siphoned off significant portions of it over the past 5 years. Slowly, subtly, in ways designed to go unnoticed by an elderly woman who trusted her son implicitly. He had created shell accounts, made unauthorized withdrawals, and essentially used my retirement savings as his personal piggy bank to fund his lavish lifestyle. The prestigious job, the expensive apartment, the fancy cars he occasionally mentioned, they weren't just the fruits of his hard work. They were built on my stolen future. The revelation was a second, more profound betrayal. It wasn't just abandonment, it was theft. He hadn't just neglected me, he had actively exploited my trust. The anger, which had been a slow burn, now erupted into a roaring inferno. How could a son do this to his mother? How could my son do this to me? "This is grand theft, Eleanor," the accountant, Mr. Henderson, said grimly, laying out the damning evidence. "You have a very strong case." The idea of suing my own son, the boy I had cradled in my arms, was agonizing. It felt like tearing a piece of my soul out. But Sarah reminded me, "Eleanor, this isn't about vengeance. This is about justice. It's about protecting yourself, and ensuring you have the resources to fight this disease. And honestly, it's about holding him accountable for his despicable actions." She was right. I wasn't just fighting for my money, I was fighting for my sense of worth, for the principle that love and trust should not be exploited. With Sarah's unwavering support, and the guidance of a compassionate lawyer, Ms. Davies, we initiated legal proceedings. It was a terrifying, public process. The thought of my private agony being laid bare in a courtroom, the newspapers, filled me with dread. But I pushed through it. Each chemotherapy session weakened my body, but each legal step strengthened my resolve. We attempted to reach out to David one last time before filing the lawsuit, a final chance for him to make things right. Ms. Davies sent a formal letter, outlining the findings and offering an opportunity to settle out of court. His response, delivered through his own lawyer, was a cold, dismissive denial. He claimed I was senile, confused, that the investments were legitimate and that I was simply misremembering things due to my illness. That stung more than anything. He wasn't just denying the theft, he was attacking my sanity. The climax arrived in the courtroom. It was a surreal experience, sitting across from David, who looked utterly unrecognizable. The sharp suit was still there, but his eyes were hard, his face a mask of indignation. He refused to even meet my gaze. My heart ached, not for him, but for the ghost of the son I once knew. My legal team presented the evidence methodically, bank statements, forged signatures, unauthorized transactions. Mr. Henderson, the forensic accountant, laid out the financial machinations in meticulous detail. David's lawyer tried to discredit me, painting me as a confused, sick woman susceptible to suggestion. But I was prepared. I had kept meticulous records throughout my life, a habit born from years of budgeting on a teacher's salary. I testified, my voice weak but clear, detailing my trust, his promises, and the shocking discovery. I spoke not just about the money, but about the emotional abandonment, the fear, the isolation he had inflicted upon me during my darkest hour. He stole my future, I said, looking directly at the judge, my voice breaking only slightly. But more than that, he stole my peace of mind. He stole the last vestiges of trust one had left in the world. Then came David's turn to testify. He was arrogant, condescending, deflecting every question, blaming market fluctuations, claiming I was forgetful. He painted himself as a brilliant financial advisor trying to help his ailing mother, only to be met with her irrational demands. But the evidence was overwhelming. The judge, a stern but fair woman, listened intently. The verdict came down 2 days later. Guilty. Not just of financial fraud, but of elder abuse. The judge didn't mince words. She spoke of the sacred trust between parent and child, and how David had callously violated it. He was ordered to repay every cent, with interest, and faced a hefty fine, as well as a suspended sentence that would hover over him for years. I didn't feel triumph. Not truly. A profound sadness settled over me. I had won, but at what cost? I had lost my son, irrevocably. The David I loved was gone, replaced by a stranger consumed by greed. The day after the verdict, I received a package. It was a letter from David. No, not a letter, a scrawled, desperate note, written on cheap paper, not the expensive stationery he usually used. It wasn't an apology. It was a plea. He had lost everything. His job, his reputation, his lavish lifestyle. The legal costs had ruined him. He was facing professional disbarment. He begged me to retract my statements, to tell the court I'd made a mistake, to save him from utter ruin. He claimed he was regretting it too late, that he finally understood what he had done. He painted a picture of himself, a broken man, brought low by a misunderstanding. I read it once. Then I crumpled it in my hand, the paper tearing under the force of my grip. Regretting it too late? He had his chance. He had months, years even, to show remorse, to offer help, to be a son. He had chosen to exploit and abandon. Now, he wanted me to save him? The same man who left me alone, terrified, and penniless as I fought for my life? I simply threw the crumpled note into the trash. There was no going back. The resolution didn't come immediately, but it began to bloom after the trial. With the legal battle behind me, and my finances slowly being restored, I could focus entirely on my health. The journey was still arduous. More chemotherapy, more radiation. But now, I wasn't alone. Sarah was there, a constant beacon of support. My other friends rallied around me. Even distant relatives, hearing my story, reached out with messages of encouragement and offers of help. I started small. A walk around the block when I had the strength. Gardening, tending to the flowers Thomas had loved. Reconnecting with old students, many of whom were now adults with families of their own, who brought me so much joy. I found a support group for cancer patients, a place where I could share my fears and find solace in shared experiences. My body was still fragile, but my spirit was mending. I had fought for my life against cancer, and I had fought for my dignity against betrayal. And I had won both battles, in my own way. One particularly sunny afternoon, a few months after the trial, I was sitting on my porch, sipping tea. The roses Thomas had planted were in full bloom, their scent sweet and calming. I closed my eyes, feeling the warmth of the sun on my face. For the first time in a very long time, I felt truly at peace. My health was improving, slowly but steadily. The doctors were cautiously optimistic. And my heart, though scarred, was no longer consumed by bitterness. I thought of David. I didn't hate him anymore. Hatred was too exhausting, too corrosive. What I felt was a profound sorrow for the path he had chosen, for the son I had lost. But it was a sorrow I could now carry without it crushing me. He had regretted it, yes. But it was too late. The damage was done, the trust shattered beyond repair. I looked at my garden, vibrant with life, a testament to resilience and renewal. Life was precious, a gift. And I was going to live it, fully and bravely, for myself. So, here I am. Eleanor Vance, survivor. Not just of cancer, but of a betrayal that nearly broke me. I've learned that strength isn't just about physical power, but about the courage to stand up for yourself, even when it feels like the world is against you. It's about finding light in the darkest corners, and choosing to rebuild, piece by painful piece. What would you do in my place? It's a question I've often pondered. But the answer, for me, became clear. I chose to live. I chose justice. I chose to heal. And in doing so, I found a strength I never knew I possessed.